You're welcome. I guess we get going. I'll start off slow because shut it down time, I guess. So this is about how Microsoft itself governs and manages Microsoft 365 as we think about Copilot. Copilot changes the dimensions a little bit about your data estate, your need for hygiene, the management around all in access management, the rest of it. I'll talk about how we do that. I'll also talk about how we label our stuff, how we govern agents, how we people agents, different types of agents. A lot has been talked about this week around agentic AI, what that means and how great it is. Absolutely, it's killer. But it means a lot to IT too. And how does IT enable this stuff? How do we think of that? How do we manage this stuff? So that's stuff I'll talk about. So first of all, who I am a little bit. I'm Dave Johnson. I'm school architect in Microsoft's IT organization, otherwise now known as Microsoft Digital. We are the organization that basically runs all the internal services, and we're the 10 admins for Microsoft 365 and Power Platform and Power BI and all the other core employee experiences and services we provide for our internal data estate. And that comes with a lot of implications, of course, that as a tenant, we're trying to be mindful and managed appropriately. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm going to lead a little bit with, not very long, but a little bit about what we have and what we do, and a little bit about our tenants and the kind of philosophies and paradigms we're working with. Because a lot of this starts with what are the basics? What are you trying to achieve? What are your rules as a company? What is your risk tolerance? Those are all parts of this. So I'll talk about ours a little bit as we're building here. I'll also talk about, of course, we're getting a little deeper around the data estate management. Because Copilot is great if it has good data to reason over, if it's the graph. How do we think about that? How do we make sure a graph is well managed? Showing which your SharePoint to OneDrive are well managed as foundations for that. How do we make sure that meetings are available? Obviously, meetings become a rather critical and highly valuable aspect of Copilot. We find that some of our most high-value employee experiences are in meetings. So we want to make sure that meetings can be transcribed to talk to the recorded. You believe very strongly of it. It changes the culture, yes, it helps. Then it helps accelerate employee productivity. And so those are things I'll talk about. But agent conversation, the Copilot conversation wouldn't be complete in now at UAS without an agent conversation. How do we govern and think about that? And I'll be frank that this is an emerging topic. We're still working this through, to be frank, right? A month or two ago, my first conversation about this, another event, and we're evolving what it all means. And so we have some basics I'll talk about. What does it mean to manage agents? Because at the end of the day, agents are where a lot of employee value is going to happen as IT you want to enable them. But what does it mean? What does it mean to the implication to your data estate? What does it mean to the application, to employee experiences, to data, and how are you going to be able to protect its state? Those are all things we think about as we manage this stuff. And so I'll lead a little bit about us. So here are some of our basic principles within Microsoft itself as we kind of think about ourselves. And a lot of these are going to be familiar because they're the same things that many of you, I'm sure, are thinking about. Obviously, you've got to be managed at scale. Well, fundamentally, I would jumbo test them ourselves. We've got to be able to manage this entire data estate. We've got to be compliant in every country we operate in. Microsoft operates 108 countries, or certainly offices in 108 countries. I would be compliant in all of them. That has a lot of implications around the services that we enable and how we enable them for our employees. And it's kind of funny to think, as Microsoft, we're talking about all this great stuff, we're bringing it into Microsoft. We're a major complex regulated company too in many ways. You've got a lot of oversight, a lot of things going on. We've got to make sure we're well managed as a company. So we have to make sure we're both trustworthy sufficiently for all of you, as well as making sure we're powering our employees. All kind of the key things we're dealing with. That is a kind of a fundamental other construct here that I'm trying to empower my employees to be successful. Because at the end of the day, I think the key role of IT is an enabler. I want to get IT out of the way as much as possible. That's a fundamental principle for us, that IT can't do everything. IT can't do every application business wants to do. That was some of the value Power Platform brought to the table. Well, agents re-envisions that and changes the game yet again as to how do we think about empowering our employees. But we empower employees to create sites, create teams, to share. We don't want to get in their way, but at the same time, we want to have guardrails because we're going to protect our data estate. That's a fundamental. I'm just as accountable to a CISO as I am to my VP with respect to each employee experiences and owning the tenant's accountability. And so we have to make sure we're doing the right thing. Obviously, Microsoft as a customer ourselves has to think what's some unique things. We dog food aggressive, right? We're clearly getting things before our view. That's good, that's challenging, it's fun, it's interesting, it's sometimes randomizing, but it's exciting. We do all those things. And plus, you want to be able to do things in a way that hopefully is a reference customer approach. That when we do something, hopefully you can do it. We're learning as we go. I'll be transparent to say we're not perfect. We don't do everything right. We are a large customer. We're doing facts. We'll make mistakes. But at the same time, we're trying to lead and show what can be done within a large company like us. So just another little bit about us. Size, we're large. And there's a few things here I'll call out. We're large in SharePoint because we let the employees create a SharePoint site. Fundamentally, people ask me, well, do you manage or do you create all SharePoint sites? And no, we let employees create SharePoint. Other than be clear, full-time employees have to own SharePoint sites. So we've got limits on who can own and all the rest of it. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But point is, we let employees create things. We're also going to hold them accountable for it. So we have a lot of stuff, whether it's apps or SharePoint or Teams or groups or anything else in tenant. We just have a large reliable to manage it. And obviously now apps and agents come as trying to grow and as part of that equation as we go. So we just have a lot of tenants that we're managing. This is why one of the other reasons why Copilot is so foundation. You want to make sure that Copilot is able to reason over all this stuff and have a good quality experience. So, but I worry about a lot of things. It's kind of funny that I'm a worrier, and I guess as IT, an architect, you kind of have to be. You want to be able to think about, how am I doing all these things, but at the same time, we're not going to get into trouble, or we're not going to get sued for something. We're going to actually do the right thing, protect our assets, or protect everything the employees have to work with. Absolutely critical. We're also going to care about sprawl. We're going to care about change management. We're going to care about apps that have access to our data. We're going to care about all these things. And so, because we worry about all these things. So, in many of these questions are ones I've heard from many customers of things that people are nervous about too. How do I limit oversharing? How do I deal with the fact that employees are getting overwhelmed with experience? Those are all things we think about as well internally, betting on our product stack, but also figuring out how do we configure our tenant? How do we make sure it's all within the possible environment? And I'll focus a little bit on the two kind of right columns here as we go through these conversations today, because fundamentally, while I have to manage the first party and all the change management and all the stuff that's coming through Message Center, and all the dog food programs, we do that. I won't talk about that today. I'll focus more on the empowerment side of the equation, how the data states behind Copilot, all the apps that are accessing the data element and tenant, how we're managing agents. Those are all things I'll talk about across the board as we go. So there are other sessions that have happened around how Microsoft internally rolled out Copilot. And we generally put up this slide, we paper it around, we put links, and you get the links at the end of the session around how we do this. Because it's everything from how did we implement and deploy to selected the right users to what right licenses, make sure we got it available in a rolled out way, all the security legal implications, going through workers' councils, so obviously need to if it will be national, making sure we have a good feedback room from our employees, and learning from it, and driving adoption across the board. These are all things that we do. With other sessions are all the adoption campaigns and things that happen. Caruana and Stefan had a session about that yesterday. But a lot of the conversation hunted around how did Microsoft itself drive adoption of things like Copilot? Because just to be clear, these are pretty big changes when you think about it. It's not just roll up a tech and watch what happens. But frankly, it took a lot of time to grow even internal use, watching building that change, because it's behavior change. It's not it really is a behavior change. It starts to go from a monthly habit to a daily habit. So I want to talk about, as we think about Copilot itself and the data state, I have to start with what I think about as a very important fundamental, which is labeling. And I think about labeling and sensitivity labels and purview is a fundamental for one key reason, that at the end of the day, Copilot's going to get a bunch of stuff back. And that bunch of stuff, you want the employee to understand how to handle it. The way I think about labeling is it's above and beyond the security. Obviously, Copilot's going to respect the security, permissions, and everything. That's really important, fundamental, totally true. Labeling takes it one step further to go, how can this be shared? Who can this be shared with overall? What is the max reach effectively? How should I be talking about this? What's this confidentiality of this thing? Like, don't take a highly confidential meeting in the Starbucks. Don't take a picture of a highly confidential screen or watermark and things like that to prevent it. But even so, to basic employee hygiene and understanding. And it's important because when Copilot gets the answer back, it's going to kind of aggregate all this stuff, these answers back from the employee. It's going to generate the response from a bunch of different things and come back with something. And that something, that answer is going to be labeled. That's one of the big things. And so if one of the sources for that answer was highly confidential, great. The answer is going to, Copilot's going to put a nice red shield on the Copilot chat and you go, hey, this is all highly confidential. And that's why it's so important that, to me, things that Copilot is reasoning over are labeled. That way employees don't have to hand it. If it's personal stuff like my mailbox, my stuff in my OneDrive, maybe that's not such a big deal, but even there we label too. But certainly shared things or things from others, labeling tells you how to handle it, how to think about it, and what kind of sharing windows it should exist, what kind of max reach exists. You know, talk about that as we go. But for me, this is kind of one of our fundamentals, just because it's that way it helps you get some additional confidence and not only have reasonable data hygiene, because labeling has a fundamental to do it to those, but it also helps you make sure employees understand how to use your stuff. And so that's why I focus so much on labeling. And I'm not going to talk about every one of these stats. We'll talk about a lot of it. But by the way, I have a paper that we did with Insight Track for AI governance at aka.ms/AI governance that talks about all these steps in much more detail than this talk we'll talk about today. The point is that I want to make sure we can share how to do these things. And these 10 steps are basically for SharePoint part of the equation. I'll talk about meetings later on and talk about agents after that. This right now is focused on the SharePoint data estate. How do you manage that? These are 10 steps for that. And how it's kind of fundamental to everything else as we go. And I start with that first thing I mentioned earlier, we empower employees to create. I'd far rather have an employee create more SharePoint sites than go deep on a SharePoint site. You've got a new audience, new project, go create a new site. Don't reuse. You know, with area that we find the most mistakes happen in SharePoint and oversharing, someone creates a folder and has nested breakaway permissions on the folder. They share that folder out more broadly. Someone else comes along and goes, I'm going to put documents somewhere on the site. They don't realize that folder is more open than the parent. Boom, you just overshare. Nobody realizes mistakes happen because, unfortunately, you got a lot of breakaway permissions. SharePoint's great for that. SharePoint enables all that. But at the same time, I far rather have more SharePoint sites than deep SharePoint sites because people are going to get permissions right. And I'll talk about how we validate permissions in a minute. But point is, more SharePoints is a big thing for us. Also, I mentioned, I know on other conversations too, that we drive our devices to OneDrive for Business. In other words, your documents folder are going to replicate to OneDrive for Business. We don't want anything just local to a managed device. For us, it's important that we can have it all in the cloud, we can deal with it appropriately, but at the same time, we want to drive people to team projects in SharePoint and go create a new team, go create a new site, go create a workspace, now go create a new loop workspace, all totally fair game for shared places where people are going to get shared work done that they can manage a shared workspace effectively. That's kind of the SharePoint and the loop workspace construct. So I let people create these things, although I have poor rules. Like only full-time employees can create a group, for example. Soon enough, only full-time employees are able to create all types of SharePoint sites. We're starting to crank down and get a little more aggressive on that too. Point is, I can limit who can create. I can also limit what the rules are once I created it. So point is, everything is managed appropriately, but I'm going to let our employees start from the go create something, begin with. So the next step is getting a label hierarchy. And this is where a lot of people get involved, unfortunately. In fact, to be transparent, Microsoft's gotten this wrong. We had a design by committee label hierarchy. And what do committees do? Well, they balance or try to get to a perfect solution where legal and security are all bought in on this complex hierarchy with a lot of rules, and it doesn't work. And I talked to my legal partners. They've got 60-something retention policies. I love that. Great. I don't want 60-something labels for employees to use on sensitivity. It wouldn't make any sense. Employees have to have a reasonable view. And so number one, keep labeling simply. Because at the end of the day, this is about employee culture. It's about employee experience and understanding. Employees don't be able to handle the data based on label of response. We're going to get it wrong. So make sure that A, they know how to label correctly. B, the label hierarchy is very simple around that. The labels also have to do what they say. We've had labels before that vague meanings, like high business impact. Well, what does high business impact mean? Well, yeah, it means different things to the people. Probably not a good label. And so we want the label to basically mean what it says. When I have a label that says confidential internal only, guess what? It's confidential internal only. It cannot be shared externally. Very obvious, simple name, simple reasoning, and that's kind of the whole point. So keep it simple, try to keep it flat. I do have divisional labels, so it's not like I only have a 5x5 matrix of labels. I have some labels that so only subject can see. So IT and security can see some labels that the rest of the company can't see. Divisions like LinkedIn or gaming can see labels others can't see. Tenant projects may see labels that are focused to them. So point is that labels will exist and there will be more of them. But point is, keep it simple for employees when you choose. You don't want to have too much choice. Simple label hierarchy, starting from the top. Obviously, the top of food chain, highly confidential, need to know data. The nice thing about this is these are all sensitivity labels in Purview. Everything is managed there. But then we can make sure that these terms make sense, do what they say. So need to know or highly confidential means just that. Don't share those groups. Certainly no broad groups for highly confidential data. All the way down to public. In fact, I don't show non-business because it's kind of not relevant, but we have a non-business label just for purposes of people put something on the OneDrive and forget, label it as non-business, it's fair game. So, but I want to start with how to then push that out. So it's really important, at least to me, to think about where labels go. Because at the end of the day, employees aren't going to label every file. That's kind of a lot of overhead. Who does that? Who thinks about if you put a file, you're now going to label each thing? Now, of course, DLP and auto-labeling are going to try to push things out. But at the same time, getting labeling right at scale, to me, the biggest driver of that is with SiteMe. Because the site group label, the container label, as I kind of call it, is fundamental. In Microsoft, every SharePoint site is labeled. I will delete a SharePoint site that is not labeled. We're that aggressive at that. Because it basically, you will create a SharePoint site for somehow it didn't collect a label, and we see that it's not labeled, we're going to give you a chance to fix it. If you don't fix it, we delete it. Because at the end of the day, I can't have a site that is not managed properly, and I can't manage it and make sure it's protected properly if it doesn't tell me what kind of sensitivity it is. So every site must be labeled. And our default label is a confidential label. I mentioned highly confidential all the way down. The middle of that food chain is confidential. And confidential internal only is the foundation for that. But every SharePoint site defaults to that. So a middle ground label. And by the way, one of the principles I probably could have mentioned earlier was we allow guests and a tenant. Now, it's not as relevant to a Copilot conversation as guests will get access to Copilot. But because guests can get access to all content of a tenant, then we're trying to enable this rich collaboration to occur. I would rather a collaboration happen on tenant than have some employee go share something by some other service that's potentially risky for me as a tenant. So that to me is a much better spot to be. So internal only is our default. You can go up or go down, highly confidential internal only, or go down to allow guests, or down to general. Those are all fair game things. But here's the key. By that SharePoint site, the sites and groups label in Purview, that then sets things like, okay, what's the permission? Is it public or private internally? Is it guests and out or not? Other properties of the site? That's foundational. But I go further. Now that Purview is, at least internally and coming soon to everybody, is on the roadmap, is the notion of setting the container to idle and default. So one of the nice things SharePoint has is a default library layer. Because I mentioned at the end of the day, Copilot will show the label of result. But that means that the file has to be labeled in order for that to happen. So by having the doc library default to be the file default, and it just mapped it correctly, we now automatically set those things. So you've got a highly confidential internal only site. Therefore, the doc library is highly confidential MS extended, which is our file equivalent. And at that point, everything in that site, new file, changed files, are all going to get labeled to match a doc library label. People aren't going to have to think about it. Highly confidential project, highly confidential file, don't worry about it. We're going to help you start. That to me is a 95% case. Most of the time for new content, people are going to go for defaults. And so we start there. So for us, internal only, mapping done this extended. Now today, to be clear, SIS is not available to everybody yet. The inheritance in Purview is configured on retented bit. Will come, or we I promise you, engineering is all that done. It's there. You just have to get it rolled out. But point is that in the meantime, one of the things you could do, of course, you could script this up yourself. One of the things we did before Purview had it is we literally went through every site collection and said, container label is this, therefore doc library default is that. You ran and send it up inside a dollar sheet. So to iterate across the tenant, setting all site defaults. So totally doable, even without the Purview nice integration, but the easy thing we'll do with Purview. But if you want to do it in their time, use the scripting approach to just get it done. And that way, default doc libraries are set correctly, because really, fundamentally, as I noted, 95% of the time, employees are probably never going to touch that default, so get that default right. Are they confidential site? Are they confidential file? So people can go up or down from there. So obviously, change the file label, make it a little less strong, or maybe a little more aggressive, for example, label-wise. Maybe you want to limit the reach. Maybe you want to make a division-only label, that confidential LinkedIn-only label that I have. Or maybe make it downgrade because you want service with guests. So downgrade your site or downgrade them for some file levels, totally fair game. For me, this is like a 4% case. People will change the files appropriately to manage. Now, the thing here is, a lot of you ask me, well, not everything's labeled. Well, the key is a lot of our content is now. And guess what? Loop, all that Copilot pages, all those Copilot notebooks, they're labeled too. They're labelable constructs. So employees can absolutely label Leak right now. And that, again, so more file types are coming, PDFs can be labeled, so in PDFs and Arab default. And so we've got a lot of goodness on labeling already today, with far more coming. I'm sure my SharePoint partners will talk a lot more about that in the next conference, but there's tons of a good label story coming. So if you bet on labeling, it's going to be nowhere more places than ever before. So for me, betting a label, you get to be really simple for employees to select and change, get intelligent defaults. That's where I start. But I've kind of mentioned that employees have to get the SharePoint set right, because most of the time, the file is never going to get touched. So guess what? What happens when employees get wrong? Well, that's where I can think about the trust but verify model gets in. And actually, I would talk about trust but verify before you move on, because I think it's actually important in this part of the conversation. So trust but verify is really about saying, now that employees have labeled something, the site, well, did they get wrong? Do we detect for it's a password in that file? And so this is where DLP kicks in to say, now I'm going to look to make sure that we actually have a sensitive information type pattern in here. Or, someone comes to us and says, we've got this secret project codenamed blah. Every time you find it, they'll label this automatically. So either auto-labeling or put DLP policies in place across the tenant. And of course, doing this in a thoughtful way so that you're rolling it out incrementally over parts of a company. One of the things we did, for example, was we rolled out a password detection policy in email. You did it slowly because you had an exception policy for where passwords in email were required. So limited exception group, but most of the time making sure you were able to actually manage. So that's just part of the trust to verify part, because at the end of the day, I want to trust my employees to do the right thing. I want to get them to label their SharePoint sites, but at the same time, I want to make sure that once they label that SharePoint site, I'm going to verify that the files on that site are actually labeled correctly, and if there's any known pattern, if it's actually problematic, I'm going to flag it and label it. And so that goes kind of above and beyond of this. So next up, training the employees though, because I mentioned getting this right is about culture as much as anything else. Policies are important. Purview can handle the policy side. SharePoint can enforce the policy side. You've got a good story between the two. However, training is critical, because employees to talk about things, as I mentioned earlier, if you talk about take a highly confidential call in Starbucks, if you don't know any better, you're not trained properly, you're going to do the wrong thing. So internally, we've done a lot of training on this. Every year, every employee is required to take security training. Our standards of business conduct training, semi-annual security trainings. You have to be up to date in the training. That includes how to label everything. And now, one of the things we also introduced with labeling, especially now that in labels come through, is getting meetings in place. This is our last training was all about meetings and meeting labels, and how to get that started. What does it mean to label those things? And it's not just about getting the training, walking them through, but also hopefully reasonably clear views for employees of how do you label what, how do you choose what. So making sure employees have that choice available to them. And by the way, the deck, it will be available because I shared the PDF. Hopefully it will come through, so you can get copies of all these slides. Here's another view of the education we have on our internal site around all of the labels, how we're all different types, whether it's a container label or a file email label or a meeting label. Fundamentally, the same basic hierarchy applies. In most cases, the language is exactly the same, with some nuances to policy, because obviously meetings have different policies for their files. But again, getting this right, tying us back to Copilot, getting this right helps make sure what Copilot listens over this is could be the show we play the right thing. I use my apple pie analogy sometimes. I say, well, if someone bakes you an apple pie, you probably want to know what apples are poisonous and made in this pie. So again, why again labeling right is so important. So I talked about that. So that's the labeling story. When you move off of that, because that's a big thing for me by itself, getting that right. But the other part of this is lifecycle management, data hygiene, more broadly. So we've got permission management. I'll talk about how we verify that in a minute. But before I get there, lifecycle management. So we have a lot of policies we did, and actually this is getting a lot better. Historically, some of the things we've done is we use the in-product tools like intra group expiration, for example, and the naming rules in intra, and of course SharePoint access reviews and intra access reviews. We've done all those things; those are all great. Now that we've got SharePoint Advanced Management, we can now do even more directly in product. Historically, we've had lifecycle management tools, which go additional above and beyond, things like enforce multiple owners, because one of the things, to me, gets you in trouble, and Copilot will kind of show this to a certain degree too, is sites that are not managed. If no one's caring and watching the store, is something going to be overshared broadly? Well, again, I want to make sure that if something that's effectively abandoned, I'm getting rid of it. I do attestation, I had owner policies, so I'd always have two owners. Everything must exist on the tenant to make sure I've got the right people apply, and I could therefore deal with that. And the great thing is now SharePoint Advanced Management has, at least in terms of being able to do via attestation, so in active sites, with a lot more reports, of course, that Dave shown and showed this conference. There's tons of great things now you can do with SharePoint Advanced Management to help you on this journey of these things, help you figure this out. Between SharePoint and Intro, there's a lot of tools. And of course, everything is exportable. You got APIs for all. You can roll your own custom code to go crawl and do what you want to do as well. So again, lifecycle management, good data hygiene, because here's the thing, at the end of the day, Copilot, you don't want that Copilot answer, you come back with some junk that's probably not cared for anymore. So great, Copilot will pull relevant content on recent content, valued content, because the semantic index will get that right, but you can still get rid of the junk. Not to mention the fact that my legal department, who I'm accountable to too, will tell me that, look, I don't want data sitting around the tenant that no one cares about. We have a data minimization policy and no one cares. Get rid of it. So we get rid of it. Of course, it's something that is up to retention policy that writes that, but besides the point, we get rid of it. So one other thing about this is access management is also driven by groups all over the place. And one point about groups that becomes important for these larger groups. A lot of content, whether it's done shared to Viva Amplify, like connections across the board to SharePoint, or now directly just securing sites, is done by large group management. That you have a CVP, an organization, all employees who are full-time in this org, under this leader, pull them in. And of course, Intro can do dynamic groups, but dynamic groups have some limitations. What happens when you want to tie it to your HR data, pull in things that aren't in Intro? What happens when you want to do a complex hierarchy of grouping? Well, I want to have everyone under this EVP, not just one layer down. So we have a tool, and there's a link here in the deck to our group membership management. We actually share this tool. This one's not yet available in Intro. It's something we're talking about with Intro, and like, how does that get in? But right now, it's a custom tool our team built we make available publicly so anyone can use group membership management to manage your own groups. And again, the reason why I tie this back to Copilot is you want to make sure the right context is available with the right people. By having the right access groups, by saying the divisional groups are already available, people can secure that divisional group. Much more straightforward. Everything's good to go in terms of knowing the memberships always can be accurate. So getting the membership accurate, run the things we need as well. One other kind of thing. Another aspect of trust or verify that I talk about, it's really important, is knowing your data estate. That you can't really manage if you can't see it. How do I know where I've got joe.toaster.com has access to my tenant? How do I know where I've got potential overshared content? Well, one way is we pull off all this data like Graph Data Connect, extract it all into Fabric, literally every group, every membership, every shared channel, and shared channel membership, cross-tenant, it all gets pulled into our effectively Fabric data state. We then run Power BI against it. I can literally know, where do I have SharePoint sites that have more than 5,000 members of it? If something is need to know, like highly confidential site, probably should be widely shared at more than 5,000 people. So I flagged that. So that's historically been all custom in terms of using Graph Data Connect to extract. Anyone can use Graph Data Connect. It's all very old, but it requires a data team, all the cost to export into Fabric. So it requires setup, all the large data management. In our case, it's roughly 10 billion rows we're managing. So it's a huge data state we're kind of working with on this one, but we get great reports. And we can actually take action in that. But this is where things get better, because now not only do you can still use Graph Data Connect like we do, so we have all the deep reporting that you want, but now like SharePoint Advanced Management includes some of those same reports. I can do this exact same thing now. It's like, well, things we're running now is complete end-to-end to say, okay, show me all sites that are highly confidential, great, get that report back, that have the more than 5,000 people as a member on something on that site. If something's shared more than 5,000, we'll flag it for you. Great, get that report back in SharePoint Advanced Management. Now, do an access review with SharePoint. Force the issue. Every one of those sites goes back with SharePoint Access Review. They confirm, is that site actually correctly permissioned? Again, now I don't have to do that completely by custom. My tooling was doing that before. I was looking for those highly confidential SharePoint sites that were online, were shut at board. Now I can use SharePoint Advanced Management to do that. So a lot of good things that make it a lot easier. You can still have a big data approach. You can get all the data you want, but you can also use SharePoint Advanced Management to take it the easiest step effectively. Just to manage your data state and understand the clear aspect of data hygiene. And for me, again, this is really important because I'm going to make sure that Copilot is going to respond for right answer. It's always to respect permissions. If something is over permissioned, it's going to sharply show that. So get rid of those over permissions. So know your data state. So that's a little bit of a SharePoint side of the equation. So I'm going to move on to the next stage. And I'm realizing, and I wish I had some here for questions, though I'll do that after. So I'm going to talk about meetings now as we go. So meeting policies. I mentioned earlier at the beginning, meetings is a fundamental aspect of Copilot. And a lot of people talk to me and say, God, nervous about meeting recordings. My legal team doesn't want me to record all meetings. They're nervous about e-discovery. They're nervous about all the legal implications of recording these types of calls. And we're worried about storage. Funny thing is, with the new recording meetings previously, back when Screen was before on SharePoint, we flooded our storage. And so we fully underget both fears of e-recording and the risk of meeting recordings. At the same time, we've got the right controls to mitigate those risks. Everything from making sure legal and privacy are comfortable. They're saying, look, employee can opt out of transcript. And we've got the guidance for employees. Ask before you record the meeting. And then we've got good expiration policies in SharePoint. Every meeting has been at a 90-day expiration. After 90 days, unless someone takes action, that meeting is going to get wiped. We also have block download of the meeting recording, block download of the meeting transcript. Only the organizer can download the meeting. Again, all things that kind of keep it intact and also give legal confidence to say, we're not just keeping this around forever. It's going to get deleted in 90 days. And yes, an expired meeting the expiry can be changed by the site owner. That's fair game. That meeting organizer can change it. But at the same time, retention policies can still layer on and still nuke it if you need to. So we've got the right controls for you to manage. So at the end of the day, legal is confident because they both have e-discovery, but not too much data. IP is comfortable because we can say, I'm not going to blow my storage because these meetings are being expired out. So not every meeting is recorded in Microsoft. A lot are. In fact, the vast majority now are, at least for transcription, because now people want the value of Copilot in meetings. The number one thing for me that's high value is I'm double booked all over the place. And so when I want to jump into a meeting midway through, being able to catch up on the meeting, figure out the questions are waiting for me to answer, then I can be on the meeting and act as a good consultant and coach, help in the meeting, and then essentially get out. Point is, I can catch up in the meeting quickly and move on. I don't have to have been there for the whole time. Really valuable stuff. Plus, we have meme labels in place, I noted earlier, that also can control who can report a meeting. So if it's a higher confidential meeting, Only the meeting organizer can record. Of course, highly confidential can also be lobby policies and the rest of it. The point is that the sort of a Copilot standpoint, that recording is going to be only there as long as it's needed and only there if it's appropriate for the meeting time. So we have meeting policies that can determine recording, the meeting labels that could determine recording. All those things are true for meeting recordings. So that's that. I'm going to switch now into agents themselves. And this is a whole new space for me because, quite frankly, we're figuring this out. I think like all of you, we were getting hit by new tech, pull into a tenant, and trying to work through what it means to manage agents. There's a lot of precedent for this, so I'll talk about that and how we think about it. But fundamentally, let's talk about builder agent governance. I will talk about this, but because this is fundamental. Obviously, Copilot was the UI for AI. Agents is now open the layer on top of that, and insert all that. So I won't talk about any of that. At Microsoft internally, we're getting a ton of value out of Copilot itself, with the transformative nature of meetings, transformative nature of employees being able to learn and catch up things, the overwhelm factor. Lots of good things for Copilot itself. I would get into any of that too much. The point is, it's already changing when it's either to Microsoft and how we work internally. But you get into the agent space, and there are so many ways you can create agents. So you've probably heard about them. You heard about SharePoint. You heard about agent builder, effectively being able to create in SharePoint, in Copilot itself, being able to create the agents. You heard about Copilot Studio. And all these different types, you create different types of agents with different types of risks. And as IT, I'm a risk-based guy. I think about what are the implications to my company? What are the risks that can happen? I think about what is the holistic, what's in the best interest of Microsoft first? What's in the best interest of our employees? What are the risks of some things happening? And so fundamentally when I do this, because all these different agent types allow different things. SharePoint is fairly straightforward. Guess what? SharePoint, I can create a knowledge agent, vision over the graph. I have access to, I mentioned all that whole time around how do we govern the SharePoint data estate. I got that reasonably covered. So SharePoint agents, I don't care. Any SharePoint site can have a SharePoint agent. You're good to go. I've got SharePoint governance in place. SharePoint agents don't scare you at all. You have full access to everything the employee has access to. Labels are all there. We literally do not hide, by the way, any labels from Copilot specifically. So while DLP and Purview can literally lock a label from Copilot, we do not do that. We have a few labels internally which are labeled as do not extract, just like standard and don't copy paste. And Copilot can't extract any information from those, but at the same time, Copilot can reason over everything. Because I do not want, I want to get permissions right first. I want to get everything right first. So SharePoint for me is not a fear from an agent perspective. Building on that, agent builder, building an agent directly in Copilot, again, not a fear. What are you going to get? You're going to get additional draft data back. You're going to give calendar, meetings, and email. Don't get. Again, it's employees access stuff, it's their game. It's already managed. We're going to be good there. So reasonably safe. I treat those as standard governance of SharePoint. I'm still working through how we're going to govern the agents outside of SharePoint, but quite frankly, it's still an in-flight thing of do we delete when the agent creator leaves the company? Do we do something more? We're still working through that. The point is, low-risk agents, we manage, we treat, we get out of the way. Let employees create those. But I have higher-risk agents. Everything in the Copilot Studio and full AI creation experience Pronaz. And this is where it depends on what you're doing, how much risk we have. We'll talk about the different types in Copilot Studio in a minute. This is where I may treat the agent more like a pro dev agent, as opposed to any employee can build what they want, share whatever they want, like SharePoint. Here, well, you may have access to SAP data, you may have access to SuccessFactors data, to ADO or Azure DevOps. You would say, there's lots of data sources we have connectors for at Copilot Studio, because we want a pro dev app to be able to have access to that. But we're going to review what are you doing, because at some point, it's kind of like pro dev app. You're doing something, there's data flows, or data implications. Should this Azure, you only touch this data, is that okay? What is it going to actually write out? Where is it going to write out to? Because agents now can write out data too, which when you think about it is kind of scary for IT, because now you go, this data from SharePoint go into SuccessFactors and ServiceNow, depends on what. I can create a ticket, I can take data from SharePoint and write it into a ticket. Yes, you can if someone builds an agent that does that, but at the same time, IT has had to vet that agent to say, yes, we're going to let that happen. So again, Copilot Studio agents are going to have a little more control and of course pro dev agents and even beyond that. And so because the risk, for me anyways, when I think about it, is on the Power Platform side, the governing in the SharePoint Power Platform side. I mentioned of SharePoint, got that covered. SharePoint governance, pretty strong. Power Platform, we're still building it out, but here are some foundations on how we think about Power Platform. Because even before agents, we had an environment strategy. And so one of the nice things is because agents are built and effectively, if it's Copilot Studio, are on the Power Platform connector model, where should an app live? Well, it can live in personal productivity, where every employee has a personal environment that's not shared, their playground effectively. Apps can live in Dataverse for Teams, effectively a group-backed environment, right? Or a full-on custom environment of anything you want. So we have all three types of environments. Every environment in this group, we're using the group's tooling and Power Platform to manage and differentiate and apply policies to all these different environment types. That way we can get thousands of environments. In fact, I think we're now up to 60,000 environments just in the developer alone. So we're growing fast in environments in Power Platform. So, but then we get into connectors, because this is where things get interesting of what data can you access? Well, Agent Builder, well, there are no connectors. It's easy. It's just Microsoft Graph. If you bring it into Graph and do lots of sessions on how to integrate data into Graph, we let it all through. If it's in Graph, we trust it, we're comfortable with it being shown, and therefore agent can reason over it and bring it out. So Agent Builder is totally covered in the Graph, would be there, no connector specifically. But personal, this is where things become kind of interesting, because I want an employee to build a little personal agent to kind of like my day help. I want to reason about my calendar potentially. I want to get access to my email. I want to do something from that. I want to potentially watch something that's going on and take action when it happens. So that personal environment is where all that's just going to occur. That my personal agent's affecting, my assistants. That's where that's going to be. And the nice thing is there, because they're not shared, it's literally the employee only have access to data they already have access to. We can be confident that the agents there are going to be reasonably safe. It's not perfect, of course, but a risk-based calculation we get, and like everything, it's a risk-based conversation. We've decided, look, personal agents are fair game. We believe a risk is low enough that yes, an insider could do bad things, but insider could do bad things if without an agent. So we're going to be okay with personal environments, agents being in a personal environment. But if I want to grow up into an enterprise agent or a business agent, and maybe some connector, I mentioned SAP, SuccessFactors, ServiceNow, all those connectors and the things that exist, Azure DevOps, whatever. Point is, the maker can request the environment. You have a whole process flow that can request environments. You have a process flow that can then request connectors to the environment. Go ahead, get the connector you need to all the different things. You're going to get the out-of-the-box ones automatically, the SharePoint, the Teams, the email, all that stuff's automatically going to be there in a custom environment. Then you're going to add in the other things you're going to want. We're going to make you prove to us that we've done the homework, that you've got a design review reviewed by your security team, signed off, potentially a privacy review because you're going to data exploring now. We're going to make you do that stuff. But again, only because in this context, you are dealing with enterprise data, enterprise systems, applications. But we're going to let people build agents at scale, this model that employees are going to build an agent. The businesses and enterprise can build an agent for their needs. Our HR team is building an employee self-service agent right now. Really cool stuff there that they'll talk more about other places. But point is, lots of agents being built to bridge all these enterprise data sources and help employees find it all in one spot. But again, as IT, we can think about how and where are we allowing all these agents to get built. And fundamentally, in Power Platform side, it comes back down to these kind of three big things when I think of that. Although Agent Builder is kind of not totally Power Platform, it's backed by this like helping out here. So I talked about projects, and this is where things get maybe a little more consistent with what we used to have. I don't know how many of you turned off third-party apps or gate line business apps. We do. We gate. You don't even let employees consent to an application, or you can't consent to calendar.read to an app. It's all turned off, and it's true. We make it go through an IT process to get consent. Why? Because in our case, we found employees who click through dialogues really quickly. They won't pay any attention to what that means, and therefore it introduces risk. So IT reviews and improves application touching intent, whether it's a third-party app running under catalog, or a line of business application being pushed in Teams, or Copilot, we review those things at scale. But again, this is only the enterprise version, the enterprise class those. Because the low risk agents, we don't need to approve and review any of those. If someone wants to pin it, has to publish it, yeah, we're gonna go through a process, quickly review and publish. But that's all the easy stuff. It's only the pro gap stuff where we're going to go over deeper reviews, because now there's a third party trying to agent that's trying to integrate in. Do we trust that agent? Do we trust the data it's going to connect to and what's going to pull out from our tenant? So those are all things we're doing to the pro dev side. And then we'll push the app side with the Copilot catalog for agents, or of course Teams or SharePoint and all the rest of it. But again, making sure we've got the right pro dev management practices in place for the tenant. So I'm really regretting now not setting myself up to take questions during. So one more thing I want to get to come to close this out, because I see that I'm running extra all the time. So to closing this out, a few principles how I think about this. That one, let employees create low risk agents, because at the end of the day, I think that transformation you saw lower, letting employees experiment becomes informant. And that means you got to trust your data hygiene. It means you got SharePoint well covered, well managed. It means your data state's covered overall, that you can be comfortable in. Or you can walk and you can say, these labels, these sites shouldn't be covered. Maybe you say, maybe your highly confidential data, you don't let come through agents Copilot yet. Great, you decide. But once you've decided, let employees play for rest. Let employees reason over what makes sense and help them get value in this. So manage your data state, build those let your employees build those personal agents to get their job done. Have a grow up path to have businesses build more complex agents, and also then figure out as IT, how do we then encourage agent development? Because at the end of the day, you can't do it. I mentioned that so much can be done in Agent Builder, so much can be done directly in SharePoint. Let employees build agents all over the place. That's all fair game. So opening that up, but at the same time providing patterns. Like the thing we're doing now, we have the Center of Excellence internally. So we help businesses, if they come to us and say they want to try something, and we have a starter of place that's supplier scaled that helps us kind of build out agents for businesses that want more complex agents, plus also help them provide patterns for employees to say, here's a great starter to go play with, kind of fundamentally all around this. And also I think the other part of this is reimagining employee experiences. We've kind of come from this from multiple different pivots. We've reimagined the cloud, and I'm going from prem to cloud. Like I did that whole migration for SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint online, which is a reimagining of SharePoint. It was don't lift and shift, literally move and rethink your SharePoint data estate and get it right, because you don't want to just carry forward all the stuff and all the solutions you have on-prem. Well, guess what? The same is kind of true now. For the legacy employee experiences that we built as IT aren't lived as well in an agent world. Agents have a lot of power for employees. They allow things to kind of fit together. So as IT, it's a great opportunity to kind of reimagine these experiences. They're AI-led, they're agent-first, that are agent assistant, I should say, that are going to basically help the employee get their job done in a more integrated ways. That's why we're doing a ton of work right now with various agents. I mentioned the HR and IT spaces, and more coming for us to help rethink how employees accomplish something. If previously it was some multi-page UI to go find something, or some complex SharePoint site with a bunch of information in it, now ask a question, get your answer, do things engage. And that's kind of how we're thinking about it. And that beats to me of the opportunities IT has to reimagine employee experiences to get us right. So I think I've got a little bit of time for questions, but before I get to questions, one more thing. This deck will be available, but there's a ton of links in here. And you can use them, because one of the nice things that even Microsoft Digital is, it's good and bad. My day job is to run Microsoft, like many of you have to run your own companies. But at the same time, I get to tell the story, I get to create articles or how we do. And our peers around me would do a lot of this. So we've got what's going to be called Inside Track, or how we manage the Microsoft data estate, how we manage teams, how we do things with the AI space, meetings details. So tons and tons of articles. How to deploy Copilot at scale, how to drop option at scale, AI governance, and all the stuff I mentioned. It's all available for you to take leverage and reference at full fact. So tons there for you to hopefully work with and build on. So I hope this was useful anyways. And please give feedback, because here's the thing. I'm not a product guy, I'm an IT guy. And as an IT guy, if this is valuable, you want to hear about it, We want to make sure we can tell a better story next time. I'm sure next year there'll be a lot more change. If anything is going to be predictable in the next year, it's going to be that next year is going to be very different than this year. And I hope this was really useful. And please give me feedback because I absolutely want to get this better. I want to come back again next year. Hopefully this was good. So